Okay, we'll make a start. So I'd like to begin by thanking the VitaFoods organizers for organizing this session today, the Fireside Chat, and the invitation for the fourth year returning to VitaFoods Europe. And also to thank you, the audience, for joining our Fireside Chat. And I'm very pleased this morning to welcome Raman Kapoor from BioAero in Calgary, Canada. So she had a little bit of disturbed sleep because she flew in from the west coast of Canada. And our session this morning is, of course, associated with the European Society of Preventive Medicine, of which I'm the Honorary Secretary General. I'm also the Director of Aging Research at King's College London and a visiting professor at the University of Oxford. And, of course, our session this morning is about AI, very topical, but also how we can apply it in the real world for nutrigenomics, healthy aging, longevity. And throughout the next 2 days, we're going to hear a lot about these kind of subject areas. So we're going to unpack that a little this morning. But before we do so, I'd like Raman, maybe briefly introduce yourself as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to the audience. So as introduced, my name is Raman Kapoor. By background, I'm a registered dietitian and have kind of shifted into the space of health span, personalized nutrition, nutrigenomics, and technology. I'm the co-founder of BioAero, which is a biotechnology company out of Canada, and the CEO of a company called the BioSport, which uses your genetics to help you understand how to better and focus on your sports capacity, abilities, and help reduce injury.
Thank you, Raman. So we've got the next 30 to 40 minutes to discuss this subject area, but at the end, we're going to have about 10 minutes for the audience to ask us questions as well. So please do prepare your questions, and we'll come back to you in about half an hour's time. So I'd like to start by unpacking the title of this chat, Integrating AI. And AI means many different things to many people. How can we understand what is AI for healthy aging longevity? Is it a computational model? Is it advanced statistics? Is it something that is mature enough for us to harness? Or do we need more research into what exactly is AI for this field?
I think it's all of the above that you mentioned, and it's definitely an area where we need more research. But I think AI is the foundation to help us move towards that personalization, the customization, but it's a work in progress. We need to continually teach the models. We need to continue to feed the data. And as well, the AI is learning as we as well are learning. So I think it's all of the above. And AI is what's going to move us to that next platform in terms of customization.
That's right. And as we discussed earlier, it's about the data that you feed into the AI model. What is the training data set? And is that data set representative of the population that you're going to apply that AI to? So what may work here in Catalonia and Barcelona may not work in Calgary or in London, where I'm from. So we really need to consider what is the data set that we're putting into the black box that's called AI, and how that data is collected. Is it collected in a clinical setting? Is it collected in a consumer setting? So all of that makes a difference. And of course, there's a process of data cleaning. Maybe some of you have heard of that, how we might adjust the data set to fit our model. And I know that you've been working in this space through your company. How have you used AI to make some kind of predictions on nutrition?
So when we look at, one of the companies, the BioSport, which focuses on our genetic data, looks at things like the pharmacogenomics, the nutrigenomics, maybe things like our muscle fibers, our chronic disease risk, but now synthesizing that data and using AI to get that next level approach. helping us understand what exactly is going to work for each individual person. So what the AI is doing is it's really helping to hone into those specific data points and how to integrate those data points into our everyday lives. Without AI, it's very difficult to synthesize all that data into one usable or multiple usable pieces of information.
That's right. And what you mentioned is really important. Everyday lives. And all of our lives are very different. It's not one size fits all.
No.
And our everyday lives are across 80, 90, 100 years. So what is suitable for a younger population
Yep.
cannot be applied to those who are over 60, for example. And areas in which we live, genetic background, even cultural background is really important when we consider the data we're collecting and the AI model we're using.
100%.
So perhaps we need to think about an AI model for specific regions, specific cultural groups, and also base it on the genetic background and how genetics isn't the be-all or end-all.
Nope.
Because there's also epigenetics.
Absolutely.
So what are you doing in that kind of space, the multi-omics space, where we're collecting a lot of data, the omics data, the blood biomarkers, the sleep data, and so on, but also the consumer data, our lifestyle?
So at BioAero, we really are focusing on that multi-omics perspective. And I think that's really, really important because it's not just about one data point. It's about your microbiome. It's about your proteomics. It's about your metabolomics. It's about the environment you live in. It's about lifestyle. How much sleep are you getting? What kind of foods are you eating? And it's bringing all of those pieces together, all those data points together, and then integrating with things like wearable technology. Everybody these days has a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or an Oura Ring gathering all this data. So how do we take all that data and integrate it together to focus on that personalization aspect?
That's right. So it's the personalization that's really important.
Yes.
Personalization, we mentioned different age groups, but also male and female,
Yep.
pre and post menopause, puberty, and so on, needs to be taken into account in these AI models when we make recommendations on what are we going to be eating food, not taking the supplements. I know this is a supplements trade show, but we are all humans. In Spain, we eat slightly differently to where we came from, our home country. The time that we eat, for example, in Spain, it's normal to have dinner at 11 p.m., whereas in Northern Europe, it may be 6 p.m. That makes a big difference. So the dietary patterns, how and when we're taking the food
Yep.
contents, all needs to be modeled through AI as well. And this helps us, I believe, shift from this reactive reaction to disease processes to prevention. Food as medicine is food to prevent diseases across the life course.
Absolutely. And I think that, as a healthcare professional, we don't practice healthcare. We talk about healthcare, but ultimately we practice disease care. By the time we get to our doctor, it's when we have a symptom, when we're not feeling well. So we're really focusing on disease care. So how do we now shift that pendulum to more healthcare, where we are preventative, we know our risks before, so that we can focus on the prevention aspect. And I think that's where we need to be looking at all these different factors. As Richard mentioned, people eat at different times. People eat different kinds of foods. How do we bring in the nutrigenomics or the nutrition? I could have two clients come in, a brother and a sister. I could provide them the exact same diet. They could be doing the exact same exercise routine, but their outcomes are different. Right? So it comes down to that personalization perspective again, and using AI for that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point, because there are studies at King's College that are looking at twins, identical
Right.
twins, but perhaps they're in different environments, what they're exposed to, different throughout the childhood, throughout the early years. That can influence disease progression or even resilience against age-related conditions, although that genetically identical. So the environment in which we live is really important. And what is it that we can perhaps harness in the way of data that is collected in different regions to better address this? We both have a nutrition background. You are seeing your patients in the community. What is it that they're asking you? I've got a data set. How can you help me?
So I think everyone's always looking for that silver bullet. What's the one food I can eat to live longer or be healthier? And I think when we look at even the word longevity, it's become a bit of a buzzword. You know, everybody's got different hacks or ways to how to live longer, but it's not necessarily about living longer. It's about living longer well. How do we add life to our years, not years to our life? And so when we start looking at all their data points and all their different markers, and we look at the different omics, maybe we're looking at the gut microbiome and the different metabolomics in there, whether they have short chain fatty acids or, you know, what kind of TMAO they have, or when we're looking at their nutrigenomics or their genomic markers or their biomarkers, it's now putting those pieces together and looking holistically in what they can do in their lifestyle. That may be looking at things like their sleep patterns. It may be looking at what kind of activity they're doing. It may be looking at what kind of foods. But the one thing that always sticks out to me is we need to go back to basic. You know, we've gone so far away from basic and living in this very busy, busy world where everything is ultimately processed. We don't have the holistic foods. We don't have the fresh foods. We don't have the outdoor environment where we just go for a walk rather than, you know, going to the gym is great. But what about just getting out and being active?
That's right. I mean, activity is part of our daily lifestyle. Activity doesn't mean running a marathon, being an elite athlete, but it could be activity just going to your workplace. Our workplace has changed through the pandemic. Many more of us are working remotely in our own homes. Our exposure is no longer, a long journey to your office, but there's much less exercise or the potential for much more physical activity because you're not constrained by the workplace. So these need to be taken into account in our modeling of a lifestyle. So it's our daily lives. It's not always your life doing a clinical study, which is often a very short period where you've got an intervention and of course you will show a difference, but longer term across the life course. So this is a life course approach, not just a 6-week or 12-week study that we need to consider. And as you quite rightly say, we need to also define what is healthy longevity. Health span, not lifespan, of course, but we often regard longevity as something that we need to consider in 30 years to come. No, we need to consider that today because our lifestyles today, or even when we were a child, will impact on our risk of age-related decline many decades later. So some research that I've been involved with is looking at the health of the fetus during the first 9 months of life. If, for example, your mother had a metabolic condition, gestational diabetes, that will impact on the disease risk of the child. And maternal nutrition while you're pregnant. These kind of areas. I mean,
Absolutely.
Is that something that you've looked at?
To some degree, yes. So we're looking, of course, at the lifespan and even understanding things like genetic sequencing of a baby right at birth can change the trajectory of their disease progression. I think when we're looking at data points, we need to be very cognizant of how to translate that information. We have access to so many different data points now, but how do we take those data points and translate them to tangible pieces of evidence or information that we can use every day? So for example, when I look at something like the biosport, this started out of an Olympian. It was a national speed skater, Hayden, that had come to us and said, you know, the difference between getting a gold medal and a silver medal is 1/10 of a millisecond. What can we do? How can I, achieve the barrier of that 1/10 of a millisecond. So we looked at his genetics, we looked at his microbiome, we synthesized those data points, looked at that information, and what we learned is that as an athlete, he had always been trained to, eat a high protein diet, focus on more animal-based proteins, focusing on certain exercises, activities. But what his microbiome actually showed is that he needed to be able to process more energy from plant-based proteins, from plant foods. And when he made that shift, he noticed a difference in terms of his effectiveness, the lightness, the energy levels, and he was able to understand those genetic data points, understand his microbiome data and those multi-omics, and actually achieve the difference between that silver and gold. So I think it's translating this huge amount of information to tangible, everyday pieces.
Absolutely. Coming back to the everyday again, we're not competing for silver and gold.
Yeah.
But we need to consider what is our own personal silver and gold.
Yeah.
What can we achieve in our physical activity? How can we optimize it with the view of prolonging health and prevention of disease processes? How can we optimize our own personalized health? And I know we were talking about earlier on different regions of the world. You all know the term blue zones. Well, what is a blue zone for us personally? Our blue zone at home is really important to consider. What is it that we can do to improve our own health for today with a view to considering in the decades to come? And how we can come back to the data that we're collecting. We are collecting data all the time. You may not know it, but this device is collecting many different parameters. So how can we harness technology that is available, that is cheap, to better inform us for prevention, for example? And as an academic doing clinical research, we are always looking at data sources. And of course, we're working together with BioAero to achieve this kind of integration of data into our research in the real world at the consumer level as well.
Yeah. And I think that integration is what's really important. It adds credibility. It adds a substance to it. But what I really liked, Richard, is what you talked about, the blue zones. And how many people in the audience have obviously heard of blue zones? So our blue zone should be in our home. Our home should be the blue zone. If I go into one of the blue zones, maybe I go to Linda Loma, it doesn't necessarily mean because I'm now in Linda Loma, I'm going to be a centurion and I'm going to live over 100 years. We have to look at our home as that blue zone, and how do we now use what we have access to through AI, through omics, through data? Wouldn't it be great if we used our wearable technology and it integrated with AI and we could just open our fridge and take a snapshot and it would say, okay, based on the fact that you didn't get this much sleep and you did this much activity and you're feeling like this is what you should eat for your nutrigenomics right now. That's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to make it so that it's simple, tangible, yet specific and personalized to each person. So each of our homes becomes that blue zone.
That's right. It's really important that we consider even the elements that make a blue zone. We talk about physical health, sleep, performance, but we often overlook, and you use the word, how do we feel? Do we feel good? Do we feel tired? Do we feel depressed? So our feeling or our psychological well-being is also a very important aspect when we consider the data we're collecting. And what are the interventions that can make us feel better? So what are the parameters of feeling? Quite often is also the psychological component. So one area which we are working with BioAero is to consider mental health, that is cognitive well-being, how we can improve brain aging across the life course. Is it only cognition? But what are the other parameters that we need to take care of? And one area that I know you're interested in is the gut-brain axis.
Yes, the gut-brain axis. I mean, the gut microbiome, we've always known we hear, oh, I have a feeling in my gut. I have a gut feeling, but we never really understood what that meant. And the more and more information we get about our gut microbiome and understand how these different microorganisms and those bacteria are working together and how they come across that gut-brain axis has a huge impact on that mental health. I always tell people that, we all know that there's a vagus nerve that runs from the brain to the gut, which is the longest nerve in our body. But what's unique about it, just like the name vagus, is that it's very, very vague. So it tends to have an impact on every part of our body, whether that be our skin health, our mental health, our immunity, our gut health. And a big part of, I think, many chronic diseases and prevention is our mental health. So just by starting to feed the gut microbiome and getting more of those good metabolites like the short chain fatty acids can have a direct impact on our mental health, which now impacts our sleep patterns, it impacts our energy levels, it impacts, our ability for better immunity. So all of that is connected.
No, absolutely. I know we don't like to use the word mental health or psychology or psychiatric, but I call it happiness. How can we enhance our own happy longevity, not only healthy longevity, because that has a big impact across the life course. And there are certain foods, as you say, the metabolites from the microbiome that are psychoactive. They can make us have a better mood. So mood is so important when we consider healthy aging. But what is a metric of mood? So often that is not integrated into the AI when we consider nutrigenomics, because we don't want to touch that area. But it is really important that our mental health is a key driver of what we actually do. So I also call it mindset. Yeah. How can we change the mindset of us as a consumer? What is it that we need to be encouraged to do? Is it education? Is it policy? Or is it a financial incentive as well? What is it that we need to implement as businesses for our customers to enable them to feel happier and to buy products?
That's a very good question. I also wear another hat, and I'm the president of a foundation called Dilwalk Foundation. So Dilwalk is a charity that I started a number of years ago that focuses on chronic disease management and prevention. So the word Dil means heart, and it stands for Do It for Longevity. And the word WALK is an acronym for Wellness, Access, Linkages, and Knowledge. And we had a summit last week where we were looking at exactly this thing, like how do we move this agenda forward in terms of all this innovation that's happening, all this AI, all this information that we're getting, how do we move it forward? And it is, I think, threefold. It focuses on education. It focuses on policymakers. We need to get government involved. We need to get policymakers involved to help integrate it into the system. And thirdly, I think it has to do with incentivization, as you mentioned. Incentives are important. How do we get people motivated to start integrating these different innovations into their lifestyle?
So the incentive, again, it's this device that incentivizes us in the wrong direction quite often. But how can we harness the digital technologies that we have available to us as an incentive? We don't like being tracked. We track ourselves, but we don't like other people tracking us, collecting data about us. But quite often we are releasing that data to different companies. Your shopping pattern, you collect points from your favorite supermarket because that's an incentive to get a financial reward. We collect air miles, loyalty programs. They're collecting a lot of data there. So perhaps we could use that kind of format. Loyalty to ourselves, to our own health. Do we pay for our own health, through digital platforms? And so one of the projects I've been considering and working with are financial institutions, such as insurance companies. Now, in the UK and in Canada, there's public health systems, but in other countries, the insurance companies are seeing this change in population demographic. And it's not sustainable, especially through the health systems in the UK and Canada, with an increasing number of individuals accessing the healthcare system. They're living longer, but then are they living healthier? No. So they're going to go and it's going to be not economically sustainable. So insurance companies, healthcare insurance, are really using digital platforms. It's called an aspect of InsurTech to actually promote healthier living. And that's through tracking data. So do you see that as a growth area, perhaps, for integrating health companies like BioAero, BioSport into perhaps fintech and insurtech?
100%. I think it's all about the integration in all these different areas. I think we have to get away from the silo approach and look at it more as a holistic approach. It's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about how do we create collaborations and partnerships, and how do we leverage one another to create a super holistic model is ultimately what it is. And I think we are so lucky at this time in healthcare where we have access to so much information, whether that be your gut microbiome, your skin microbiome, your oral microbiome, your, inflammatory markers, your genetics, your nutrigenomics, your pharmacogenomics. With all this information out there, we should be able to be making decisions based on us. This one size fits all. It's very old school. If I'm going to take a Tylenol, I want to know, or acetaminophen, I want to know, is that right for my genetics? If I'm going to the gym, as a woman who wants to increase her muscle mass, I started going to the gym. And so I started to do weights and did them for a few weeks, months, and didn't notice much change, but I kept increasing the weight, which most likely would probably increase my risk for injury. Then when I looked at my biomarkers and I looked at my genetics, I understood that for me, weight bearing or weight activities are not as beneficial as endurance. So then I completely switched to my workout routine, incorporated more endurance, continued with the weight, but a little bit less emphasis. And lo and behold, I started noticing changes because now I'm working from my own data points, my own data sets.
That's really important. The personalized data that we're collecting from, your performance in the gym through to at the molecular level. So I'm really interested in epigenetics, how our DNA is switched on and switched off, not only through the foods that we eat, the supplements, but also lifestyle,
100%.
life force exposures, the air pollution, the water, the travel, and even stress at work. We spend most of our lives, as I mentioned earlier, in the workplace. It is a stressful environment, even if you're at home, and how that also impacts on what we need to have as an intervention to reduce stress or become more resilient to that stress through the foods that we eat. And so we need the data, the metrics collected for us. What works for me will not work for someone else.
Yep.
So it's that kind of data approach that we need to consider when we do research studies. We always look at population studies, but is that population appropriate for us? So these are areas that we are working together with many industry partners. So as academics, as clinicians, we need real-world evidence. So we are working, for example, with consumer goods companies, supermarkets, banks, insurance, all the way through to public healthcare. So in the UK, there's a program called Our Future Health. Those of you who are living in the UK, you can't miss it because they go out to the supermarket car parks and they collect data just by measuring blood pressure, heart rate, and so on. They invite you to have a health check. But even by considering your own personal future health, you're making a difference to your choices at the supermarket. So there is precision nutrition for yourself. There's precision or personalized intervention, but it's about how we can prevent diseases. How can we become more resilient to the environment in which we live? And how we can be predictive. So this is the 4P approach. Prediction, early detection. What are the biomarkers, from digital to blood biomarkers to sleep patterns, through to easy ways in which we can monitor our psychiatric well-being. I think that's really important way forwards for the future, how we can harness AI, nothing wrong with AI, but to be focused on these kind of personalized areas. Just to thank Raman again
Thank
for
you.
coming to Barcelona for this session.
Thank you.
And to you, the audience, for asking great questions.